So the Omaha Star Institute, 501c3 organization, we will take your donations and give you a receipt. But that supports not only the organization, the Omaha Star, but you heard it here first. We are going to establish an Omaha Star Museum located in the office space at 2216 North 24th Street, where the current office is and has been since February of 1942. And this building is 100 years old. So we are in the process of, we got LB, I think it's 531 funds, or we have been approved for, let me say that because I don't have a check yet. But we are getting some of those funds, and that will be dedicated along with some other grants that we've received to converting this office to that function and moving the operations of the Omaha Star to the building next door, which is 2218. And what people might not know is that Mrs. Mildred Brown, when she established the newspaper in this office, there is an apartment right behind this office with red carpet and gold wallpaper, and her golden French provincial couch and dining room set and everything else she owned is still in that apartment. And the Chantilly powder is still on the dresser. So we will be restoring, I don't want to say renovating, we will be restoring that space so that the public can come and see how Mrs. Brown lived and learn about the Black newspaper and Black journalism. Now, one of my prompts for doing that, there is not another museum that I know in the US dedicated to Black journalism and the Black newspaper. Excuse me. Oh, nose itching. But so we will be the first in the country to have that. And I hope that brings people far and wide. And by me being a member of the NNPA, and by the way, Mrs. Brown was at the table when that association was started, and she was the only woman at the table at the time. So yeah, I got some big plans.
We're getting close to the part where we open up to the audience, but I had one other question I was going to ask you. By the way, I was talking to Leo Lewis probably about a week or two ago, and I've been known for writing letters and hot letters and long letters and that. And at one point, I sent Leo a letter, and it took him a number of months to open it and get back to me. I was giving him a hard time, and he came back and says, "Oh, Jamal, a lot of people don't write hard letters and mail them. They usually send a PDF, and then they'll text you or something like that or whatever. But that old school of writing letters and putting them in the mailbox is kind of old for some of us." So he's kind of dogging me, saying, "If you want to get real quick results, send it electronically and stop using snail mail." But again, it's something about old school, and we're used to doing it and signing the letter and so on. But yeah, and I know you cannot, when you have examples of letters, people came back, they didn't get an email, even though it didn't bounce back. So it's very important. We're going to move over to ask the participant any questions on, but do you have any closing comments, any comments you want to say before we open it up for other people to ask you questions or feedback? Terri.
So people tend to say to me and say to others, newspapers are dead. No, they're not. Newspapers are the only breadcrumbs you have back to news. There are no breadcrumbs when it comes to social media. Social media does not keep an archive. You put it on there and good luck finding it in the next hour. You may or may not be able to find it. You put it in the newspaper, you can find it. We have what's called archives or old papers or however you want to talk about it. But that's a breadcrumb to what's really going on. And so I tell people, no, newspapers will always be, because those are the breadcrumbs to our history.
Right. And I also will say that a lot of stuff that I've learned over the years, not only from the elders or people whose shoulders we stand upon, but by reading and looking at those newspaper and articles and Ida B. Wells about the anti-lynching campaign. You get a lot of stuff in non-traditional newspapers that cater to making sure that news is out there. And again, sometimes, as you just earlier when you talked, that sometimes it leads, and sometimes we don't always talk about bleed and lead. We deal with some of the other issues in our community. We're much multifaceted people. So at that point, let me stop and then let the participants on the Zoom here on Facebook say have any comments. Any questions, anything, raise your hand, whatever. You can ask directly to Terri. I've had my chance to ask her some questions, so we let people here do the chat or whatever. Other feedback.
Oh, come on now. Somebody wants to know something. I can keep talking.
I do know that I will say that there's a description of the star that comes in our home, and there are a number of people in our home who actually read it. So I agree with that point of sometime when people get an electronic copy, they may see just that one digital version. But even when I worked with that Douglas County administration, when you go into the break room, there's a copy of the Omaha Star there. Now, many of those folks would pick it up and look at it and read and see what was going on in the community.
Sure. And that's what we're here for. And that is our lifeblood, our readers. I have people stop me in the grocery store. They say, I know you from somewhere. I'm like, was I on a milk carton? And they're like, no. And then they look at me real strange, like, oh, are you that kind of person? And then sometimes I tell them who I am, and sometimes I just let them guess. And I said, well, it's nice seeing you, and keep it going. You know, Omaha, especially in the Black community, is small, and everybody knows everybody. And so I appreciate that. You know, somebody says, well, I sent you something, honey, send it again. I'm sorry, I missed it. You know, I get a lot of email, and I backtrack, uh, and I will get it done. Sometimes I do miss. I try not to, but I do miss. And so I try to bring things to light as the publisher. I started something called Out and About, which are a lot of pictures. You know, pictures speak 1,000 words, and sometimes people don't want to read, but they sure will look at a picture. And I encourage people, if they're submitting articles, be sure to give me a graphic. If it's your logo, if it's a picture of the event, people will read. If it's a lot of print, people are not going to read that.
Got you. By the way, just quick question. When they send stuff to you, they electronically send it. If community people, do they pay to just send you stuff? Let's say if somebody wanted to announce some event, do they have to pay for that if they send you like a community meeting or anything like that, or is that part of your business thing?
No, they do not have to pay for it. As long as you don't try to sell a ticket in your advertisement, there is no cost.
Okay,
And
so
let me,
people, go ahead. Go
yeah,
ahead.
go ahead.
Go ahead. Now I was gonna say, if that's the case, then people who want to know about other events of the community, they need to send it to you within a week or 2 weeks of the event so they can get it out in time, right?
That's right. And we do something called the Tuesday Report,
Mm-hmm.
which is a digital newsletter. So it meets halfway between when the paper comes out. Paper comes out on Friday, Tuesday Report. And by it being digital, if I receive something that has a QR code on it and it's clickable, then people can click on it and go right to it. So I am really pushing that. We have about 3,000 subscribers that we email to with that Tuesday report. So that is a popular little piece.
Mm-hmm. Wow. By the way, you keep alluding to yourself as the person there. Do you have a staff members or board, or how does that operate? Because I remember there was a scholarship board one time. But I don't know for sure, but I thought there were some other organizations associated with the Star. Who's
So
out there with you? Who's your backup in your posse?
you see those weeds, that's the backup. No. Um, we have one reporter. Her name is Asia Rollins.
Mhm.
She was a Mildred Brown scholarship recipient and went to Hampton University.
Mm.
Graduated a couple years ago, came back home for the summer, wrote a couple articles, and then she was hired by a newspaper in, I think it's Spartansburg, South Carolina. She called me last August, Miss Terri, would you write me a reference letter? I said, why? She said, well, I hate it here. I said, oh, do you? Oh, it's really racist. I said, you in South Carolina, darling. Did you not know that? Well, I didn't think it was like that. Uh-huh. Well, it is. So instead of writing her a reference letter, I invited her to come back and work for the Omaha Star. And she is, and she does. And she writes fantastic pieces, certainly longer than what I write, more detail. And it gives us a different perspective of news. So I can think about one article she wrote on the Busy Vegan, which is a young lady that has a vegan cooking service. She does meal prep. I'm a carnivore, so I would have never found her. But I met her recently at a No More Empty Pots event, and she was quite delightful. Taught us how to make cabbage soup, which was good, even minus the meat. And she wrote about a young lady who has I'm going to call it a hot dog stand in the Women of the World building. And she moved here from Chicago and has Chicago style dogs. And for people that are hot dog connoisseurs, you know what that means. And she was trying to get out of Chicago. She went to the bus station, showed them some money, and said, "Where can I go for this amount?" And Omaha, Nebraska was it. And that's how she got here. I would not have known about her. She just did an extensive article on the Crumb Cake Bakery. I've had their cookies, but didn't know their details. So you're getting a younger perspective of what is going on. I do the old hard school news, and she does the young stuff.
Gotcha. Different age levels and so on. And
different age levels.
One of the things we're thinking about more is how hosting an event later in the year called intergenerational communication, because we see some folks have no clue about old school, and sometimes our institutions don't do a good job of linking some of those we call credible messengers, or those historians and elders in our community, with some of the younger people. And some of the people who work in academic institutions sometimes get on their local Black history through our cultural things through books. And you and I both know we have these people in our community who are just walking archives, and you got to know about what happened in Omaha, when it happened, and some people who are still alive experience some of the very things of our civil rights movement. So very important.
And we're losing those ancestors in droves.
There you go. Folks, other folks on the set, anybody want to ask Terri a question or comment or even react? And I see we got a number of people here, and some of you I know are not very quiet at times, so I'm surprised. Yes, say it. Go ahead. Turn your mic on. Your mic is off.
Got it. Hi, I just want to say thank you, Terri. I enjoy your paper. I have it delivered because I'm not good at looking at a screen for my news. I want to hold it.
Yes.
So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
I wanted to say thanks.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
When you talk about people who are walking around with history, in our offices, we have some collages. Collages that are clippings of Omaha Star articles. And some of them feature yearbook photos. Some of them feature sports figures. Some of them even feature, remember when we used to have clubs like the Midwest Athletic Club and all of those? There is a collage that shows that. And that gentleman that put those together is Mr. James Glass. And so I have a collection of his collages. They're usually copies of articles. It's not the articles cut and pasted, but cut and paste of the pictures. And so when we open the Omaha Star Museum and our offices, some of those will be in there, and they'll be changed out periodically. So he is a wealth of knowledge. I recently presented with him at Children's Hospital. He has a niece that works there, and it was on Zoom. Plus we had in-person people. And just to listen to the things that he knew about. He was a teenager when the insurrection of North Omaha, the riots, when that happened, he talked about that and who he knew and what happened to him and when it happened. And I was walking home, I saw him, and then the next day they were dead. Those kinds of things. And just to hear him talk is phenomenal. And no, he is not talking to everybody, but he does talk to us. So we appreciate that.
Yeah, and again, I really encourage and push that many of our institutions do a better job of bringing community people into the education institution and so on. Cynthia, I see your hand is up. Cynthia.
I'm someone who I just really admire you, Terri, as I've watched my copies of the Star pile up higher and higher. And then I'm relieved to know that you have a digital to go back to, because I was looking for a copy the other day, so I know now I should just look on the archives you have
Yeah,
up there.
look on the
And
archive.
also, I was doing research on Father John Marcoux and the not decorous,
The
the
pores.
porous, right? And I ended up on the Omaha history site, which included the star and a picture of him with the young people there. So
Yes,
history of his work in that part of Omaha, crossing over the red line into where he wasn't supposed to go, and used his free time to go there. So
yes.
that's for me as a Catholic, that's a strong part of the history that I'm glad to see that the star was a part of that. And I think it also said Margaret Brown allowed them to have their meetings when they were ousted from somewhere.
I was just going to say that when Creighton University kicked them off the campus, they met here at the Omaha Star. So this was quite a centralized place for meeting. And the young lady that works with us now, she said that when she interned here, she said it was kind of boring. I said, well, what do you mean? She said, people are always coming in here asking questions, and people just come in here and I hear so many stories. I said, yeah, we got a lot going on. So we're still that.
You know, as you mentioned the history, so on Adam Fletcher Sass, we had him on. He does that North Omaha history about a week or so ago, and he really laid out some stuff. And I was just surprised how extensive his archive and what he's done over the past few years. And one of the things we talked about the show is how do we increase more people to have appreciation of the history of North Omaha and what people went through to achieve where they're at today. So it's very important for people to look at history and not ignore that. And of course, some of that is obvious through reading newspapers because again, there are not a lot of books that are written about the social justice movement in Omaha.
Right.
People went through for jobs and elsewhere, and even being able to make sure that people can buy in certain stores. And people think of that as only happening in the Deep South, and we know we had similar situations at Peony Park and elsewhere. So those are important issues we need to talk about. Other questions, other feedback from participants.
So let me piggyback on what you just talked about in social justice. Did you know, or did anybody know, that before Rosa Parks started the issue with the bus, that the Omaha Council Bluffs bus line, I think it was 1954, had a bus boycott?
Did not know.
And the bus boycott was that they did not hire Black drivers. And so Mrs. Brown and some other people encouraged people to not ride the bus, but if you had to ride the bus to go to work, bus fare was 18 cents. She encouraged people to pay with pennies. Now, the significance of that is that at the end of the day, the bus drivers had to count their fare. If you had 200 people riding and they all paid with 18 pennies, you know what? That was a very short-lived bus boycott. They quickly got that in order because they were like, look, we can't keep counting all these pennies. And so social justice has always been a part of the Omaha Star. And people don't know that. For those that remember Reed's Ice Cream, there was a picket line in front of Reed's that said, we can drive your tanks, but we're not good enough to drive your ice cream trucks. Again, that quickly turned around and they had Black drivers for the Reed's ice cream trucks. So Mrs. Brown was a part of a lot of things. She was not a journalist per se. She was more of an advertising person, but she rolled those ads in here and kept this paper going until her death in 1989.
You know, it's funny you should say the Reed's ice cream. I didn't know about the Reed's ice cream until I was at a workshop, or not a workshop, but a presentation on diversity and race at one of the towers. And Brenda Council gave a whole history about Reed's ice cream and how they used to go after church and buy it. And I says, well, our family never got to the Reed's ice cream, so we were too poor. So I didn't know it existed. But I asked somebody else who was an old timer, and he knew all about Reed's ice cream and said they originally started in Des Moines. And again, it's part of that history. And so it's very important for us to know about that. But I did not know about a lot of those kind of things until people start to share things. Because again, depending on what your income level and where you lived at, some of this local community news you didn't know anything about.
Right, right.
Other
So
feedback. Go ahead, sorry.
a gentleman came in here today, Mr. Carter, and he's 80-ish years old. He was one of the paper boys for the Omaha Star. The Omaha Star used to be distributed door to door.
Mhm.
And I was corrected. The cost of the paper was a quarter. So the paper boys got, and because she didn't have paper girls, she just had boys. And they got a nickel and she got 20 cents. That was the start of entrepreneurship for a lot of people. And this gentleman said, you know, I could take my girlfriend to the movies because I sold Omaha Stars. So, you know, there you go.
There's also something that brings back memories. I had an older brother who's late, but I remember when I was a kid, I was probably about 6 or 7 years old. He was walking down the street. A block from the Omaha Star was a shoe place. And I remember I had
Mhm.
shoes on, and one of them didn't have a lace in them. They maybe neither one. And this man at the shoe place just called me over and put shoelaces in my shoes. And I never forgot that. I was like 6 or 7 years old. I was young with my older brother, but I remember it happened. That building's been there for many years. I think it's still there, but I'm not sure. But I
It
remember
is still there. I know
when I
right
was a
what
kid, the
you're talking.
shoe place, and the guy gave me some free shoelaces. We were poor as a church mouse, but I remember that act of kindness. I never forgot it. So, right,
But you know what? That speaks to community. And community looks out for one another. And community, you know your neighbors, you watch out for the neighbors' kids. And that is community. That is neighborhood. Now we live in quote unquote hoods because we don't know our neighbors. We're not looking out for anybody else but yourself. And so that is the joy, blessing, and positiveness of being in a community.
right, right. And it's very important to build that social capital relationship amongst
Mhm.
neighbors and people. And I know one of our board members talks about neighborhood groups. And so we really need to push that and bring people back to those camaraderie days where we did a lot more. Other
Yes.
feedback, other reactions.
You ask about who else is here beside me. Well, Asia and myself. So we do have a board for the Omaha Star Institute, newly established board. Former, before, the newspaper was owned by the Mildred D. Brown Memorial Study Center, which was established in 2007 to introduce high school students primarily to the profession of journalism. So back in 2007, you had radio, TV, newspaper. You did not have social media. You did not have blogs. You did not have YouTube. There's a lot of upgrades that have happened since that organization was established. And that is the organization that the Omaha Star Institute purchased the paper from.
Wow.
So that might be something people didn't know. And you ask about the board. Dr. Amy Force, that wrote the definitive book on Mildred Brown, she is on the board. Mr. Ernest White, who is at American National Bank, he is on the board. My infamous daughter, Simone, she is on the board. There is a person that is a STEM expert, Toy Massey, who is in Denver. She is on the board. Angela Green Garland is our board president. She too is in Denver, and she is the Cherry County School Board president in Colorado. An older son, my older son, Daniel Jose, he is on the board. He's in Tupelo, Mississippi. Seems like I'm leaving somebody off. Jennifer Keys, who is the archivist for the paper, she is on the board. So the board is spread out. Oh, most important, David Winton is on our board, and he is in Alabama, I believe. But David is Mrs. Brown's cousin. David happens to be Caucasian. David came to visit about 2 years ago. He was here to speak to Amy's class, Dr. Force's class, and she told me he was coming. And if you ever have a chance, we have a copy of Black Print, White Carnation, which is the name of that book. And she interviewed over 125 people about Mildred Brown. I mean, it's extensive. And he is one of the people that she visited with, and she went to visit him in his home. And so when he came to Omaha, I said, well, would you ask him, would he come by the paper? And she said, sure. So he was getting out of the car and he was kind of looking around. And he said, I thought this was some kind of old rundown dump. He said, I feel so good that it is not that. And we talked and we correspond a lot. And one of the things when he came to visit, I showed him Mrs. Brown's apartment. And he said, oh, yeah, this is just like Millie, that red carpet and that gold wallpaper. That's her all the way. And there is a picture in that apartment that I am very proud of. Do you remember when there were velvet paintings? I mean, big as a mirror.
That's old school.
And they had lights in them, right? The lights in that velvet painting still work. And when people come in and I show it to them, I flick that light on. I'm like, see, this is what you call class over here. So David is also on the board. So it is very diverse in not only location, but in makeup.
Gotcha. You know, one thing that just jumped out at me in terms of the journalism school and so on, you have a relationship with the academic institution, those who teach journalism? Is it being taught in the way it's been back in the day, or is it just kind of like blog or freelance? Because I've heard in some papers that people can come with different majors, English, they don't necessarily take formal courses in journalism. So what is your relationship to the journalism courses or programs here in Nebraska? Do you have anything in relation to that?
We do have a relationship with Creighton University. That is my alma mater. And somebody told me that the journalism school was closing. I was crushed. I haven't been able to verify that. But at one time, there was a scholarship in Mildred Brown's name at Creighton. And so we do have a relationship. I'm trying to worm my way into a deeper relationship. Kathy Hughes, who got her start at the Omaha Star, Mrs. Brown bought Kathy her first radio. And now, of course, she's a radio mogul, multimillionaire. The Howard University School of Journalism has been renamed for her. And when I was considering buying the paper, I called her up because I knew her when her son was called Pumpkin and not Alfred Liggins III. I called her and asked her what she thought. And she said, you know, we get the Omaha Star in my office. I was flattered, no less. She said, and I make everybody in the office read it. So there you go with those 6 people. But I'm saying all that to say that the School of Journalism at Howard University is now named after her.
Wow.
So I approached her and I said, can we, in the very near future, consider having an internship program where someone from your school, they don't have to come and stay all summer, they can stay a week or 2 weeks, but actually works in the Omaha Star. And she said she would be glad to investigate with that. And so I'm going to take that further. That's part of the future planning.
Good, good. We're getting down to one of the last part of our show. And one of the things we do is like to allow the guests at some point to share any closing comments. But Terri, do you have anything you'd like to share with our audience? And also, how would they catch up with you or make contact with you at the Star?
So again, email is publisher@omahastarinc.com. You can call me on the phone. I do answer 402-708-8868. And we're at 2216 North 24th Street. If I'm leaving or I'm going to be out of the office, I hang a sign on the door, be back at. I don't think it's fair for you to have office hours and you're not here and people come to the door and they don't know where you are. I don't necessarily tell you where I am, but I will let you know when I'll be back. That's real important to me. My parents owned a beauty supply on the corner of 24th and Wirt Street. And the one thing I learned when I was a little girl, like 2nd grade, I used to stand on a box and check people out with their beauty supplies. And so I didn't watch cartoons on Saturday. I worked because that's what you do. And so I learned from them and at a very early age that if you're in business, you need to be in business. If you have open hours, you need to be there for open hours. Not, oh, nobody came by, so I left. That's not acceptable. We can't do that. And I wish more businesses subscribe to that kind of attitude.
Wow. Well, Terri, really appreciate you being on the show today and sharing with our listening audience and viewership about the Omaha Star. It's a very important institution in our community, and we need to get more and more folks engaged in understanding the history. And one of the things that disappoints me sometimes is when folks come to Nebraska from other places, they don't know about the rich history of particularly the African Americans in North Omaha. And obviously, that Omaha Star is a gateway to helping us understand and appreciate what folks have done for many of them to be able to arrive here in Omaha. So we really appreciate you being here today.
Ooh, and I'm so excited to be here. And let me say that I love to talk about the Omaha Star, the history of Omaha. And if anybody wants me to come, just let me know.
Yeah. Well, folks, we hope you've enjoyed this. We do have a couple of announcements. We're going to have Alex Johnson, who's one of our board members, talk next week about Bannisters on his program. So we've already scheduled that. We also are planning on having a couple of Namibians who live in Southern Africa talk about their experiences about poaching and issues with the conflict between Botswana and Namibia, where people are shot or killed if they attempt to harvest the horns of animals or rhinoceros or so on, and elephant tusks. So we're going to talk about that as an international conflict, and how do we talk about the issue of environmental issues versus human lives. And so that's something we have planned. We also have a couple other events related to bringing more and more people into the circle of talking about news items and issues that we don't traditionally hear in our media. So we hope that you will join us in the future. And also, we'd like to have feedback from you on our various programs, as well as if you can go to our website and fill out evaluation forms, where we do share with our participants as well as our guests about some of the feedback that we receive. So if there are other things out there you'd like for us to cover, feel free to contact us. This is moreomaha.org is our website. And again, be able to communicate to us about things you'd like to see covered in this traditional way that we do it via Zoom and Facebook Live. We hope you've enjoyed this edition of Throwing Out Some Heavy Light. As we say always, may the force be with you. Baroko.